It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming!
Significant improvements in the quality of broadband access for Grenada and its dependencies. We'll have details to this story and more in the national report. With the details to the news for Wednesday, May 15th, I am Rakisha St. Louis. Grenada and its dependencies will soon boast of significant improvements in the quality of broadband access, which will be facilitated under the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, CACIP. The World Bank-funded project is being executed by Digicel on behalf of the governments of Grenada, St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This phase of the project will include the installation of marine fiber optic cable is being done by the Canadian-based company International Telecoms. The project will increase access to regional broadband network by bringing true broadband connectivity to schools, community centers, and government offices. It will also advance development of an ICT-enabled services industry in the 3 beneficiary countries. During a press conference on Wednesday morning ahead of the start of installation of the subsea cables, Minister for Infrastructure Development and Public Utilities, Honorable Gregory Bowen, said this is a major milestone for Grenada that paves the way for the inclusion of advanced technology in the future development of the country. He said each sector stands to benefit from this project.
Our children being able to work online, our examinations being done online, no buffering, lecturing. I've always advocated that the best mathematics teachers should teach mathematics to the entire people in Grenada and perhaps the region. We can do this now with broadband. So we sit in one school and the teacher lectures to everyone because of the technology. The opportunities are great. Jobs from one location, working for persons in other locations, other countries, this can manifest itself from what we have now, our broadband system. Carriacou, we are especially pleased with Carriacou because with all the development, they have never had the opportunity for real broadband, always a radio link.
Project Offshore Installation Manager for International Telecoms, Todd Nichols, said the installation process will commence on Thursday. He said the cables will be laid on the seabed from Conference Bay, St. Andrew to the east of Kikamjini, going on to Hillsborough, Carriacou.
We anticipate getting underway tomorrow. From here over to Conference late tomorrow and spending all day Friday on site doing some trials and prepping the beach. From there, we hope to get underway Saturday morning, which would put us into Carriacou on Sunday. We will see how time goes, but the Carriacou segment, that's 53 kilometers in length. That is the longest segment of this particular project, and but we anticipate being able to have that completed by Sunday. So yeah, we're very excited about participating with everybody here.
Siobhan Redhead, CEO of Digicel Grenada Limited, said she's pleased that Digicel and the government can collaborate to enhance the technology of the future.
Being introduced via fiber subsea, which you guys are here responsible for laying, which will be connected to our terrestrial fiber on the ground, will not only provide tremendous capacity, unprecedented capacity for our network, and off-island capacity and network resiliency. Now, this technology will provide the bandwidth for tomorrow's technology. It will not only change the way we evolve in terms of how we communicate, it will change the way we're able to deliver education in schools, and it will also change the way we run our businesses, and that's something we have to acknowledge across Grenada, Carriacou, Petit Martinique, the Grenadines, and by default St. Lucia and St. Vincent through this CASTEP project.
Following the press conference, government and digital officials were given a tour of the telecoms cable ship to get an understanding of the installation process. International telecoms officials say installation of cables process will be eco-friendly, minimizing harm to the ecosystem. The entire process of installation and testing will take approximately 5 weeks. The Blue Innovation Institute, through the Ministry of Climate Resilience and the New York University, will host the first in a series of Climate Smart City Expo on the Carriacou in front of the financial complex St. George's on Friday. The activity, which runs from 12 to 9 p.m., will include a visual expo of the challenges of climate change and the potential solutions. Dr. Angus Friday, co-chair of the Blue Innovation Institute, says it has become necessary to host the expo to encourage dialogue and increase sensitization about the issues of climate change.
We're working with the Green Climate Fund and New York University on this, and once we get past this initial hurdle, Grenadians themselves will have the technical capabilities to be able to replicate this in other towns and urban areas around Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique.
Dr. Friday says the New York University has been a technical supporter throughout the project, and representatives will be on hand to share information on their findings.
They have come up with a narrative around some of the challenges related to sea level rise and solutions for things like urban densification. A lot of the traffic that we're seeing building up now is also part and parcel of the problem. But if we can come up with solutions for this, it would put Grenada very much ahead. Solutions related to new forms of public transport, e-mobility, and so forth. By e-mobility, I'm talking about electric mobility. So these are some of the things that people will be learning about.
One of the interesting initiatives undertaken in the project by the New York University was to put tide gauges in the harbor at Grenville and St. George's.
We took that data and sent it off to NASA. That's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the United States. They did some very interesting modeling, basically showing us that the Carriacou is in danger of being underwater in a few years' time, just as a result of storm surge. I think sometimes we already see the waves coming over the Carriacou. So this is a huge concern. And by 2050, it'll be completely underwater. So we need to begin to take steps now to put in place the solutions that would not only deal with a problem, but would actually help to attract more investment, more life, more activity.
The Climate Smart Cities Expo will begin at 12 noon with various presentations at different intervals during the afternoon prior to the cultural package and the lighting of the buildings on the Carriacou. This is the National Report. We'll have more news after the break.
Data reveals that rats and other rodents are responsible for the transmission of many diseases. In Grenada, the most common is leptospirosis, and it can cause your death. This disease is directly related to rats and mice infestation. Signs and symptoms of lepto, as it is commonly referred to, are high fever, headache, chills, muscle aches, vomiting, jaundice, and abdominal pain. If your home had or is infected with rats and you have any of these symptoms, please check with your doctor immediately. Declare war on rats. Starve them. Kill them. Rats are the most unwelcome guests. Reduce, control, eliminate them. This is a message from the Ridge to Reef Project, protecting biodiversity and ecosystem functions.
Welcome back. CARICOM foreign ministers who met in Grenada this week are calling on the European Union to adopt a more collaborative approach with regard to the subject of blacklisting. The ministers who met at the Radisson Resort say the EU's approach to tax governance is inappropriate. They say the relevant agency to deal with these matters is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, which is inclusive in allowing other member states to be present and to be consulted. The foreign ministers also touched on a wide range of topics ranging from climate change to border issues. On the subject of Venezuela, the ministers reaffirmed the guiding principles of non-interference and non-intervention in its affairs. Foreign Minister Honorable Peter David addressed the subject at the conclusion of the two-day meeting on Tuesday.
St. Kitts leading, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados involved, and COFTOR merely reiterated the position that we call for dialogue in Venezuela and we are urging the parties together. Fortunately for us, over the last 5 months, we found that many of the countries who previously advocated war and intervention are now agreeing to the Carriacou's position, and they are more accepting Carriacou's position, recently manifested in the visit by the St. Kitts Prime Minister Timothy Harris to Latin America, where he had engagements not only with Latin American countries who are calling for dialogue, but also with some of the European countries who have now accepted that position.
That story just ended the national report for today, Wednesday, May 15th. Let's recap the top story. Significant improvements in the quality of broadband access for Grenada and its dependencies. On behalf of everyone here at the Government Information Service who made this newscast possible, I am Rakisha St. Louis saying thank you for joining us. Until next time.
Government pension. What are the facts? Are all public workers entitled to pension? Are public workers owed gratuity? Here are the facts. Fact 1. The Pension Disqualification Act of 1983 was validated on April 21, 1985 by the democratically elected government led by former Prime Minister Herbert A. Blaise. This means that public workers employed after February 22, 1985 are not legally entitled to a pension from the government of Grenada. Fact 2. The judgment in the Hermelin Armstrong case does not create legal precedence for the reinstatement of pension to public workers employed after February 22, 1985. The judgment created a legal precedence only for those workers who joined the public service in a pensionable post between April 4, 1983 and February 22, 1985. There were 56 such workers. The government restored pension to those 56 workers in 2018 at a cost of $7.7 million. Fact 3. All officers employed in a pensionable post who joined the service after February 22, 1985 are not legally entitled to a pension from government. They are only entitled to a pension from NIS once they meet the necessary requirements as per the NIS Act. Fact 4. The Cabinet's decision in 2016 to reform pension is rooted in moral and social justice principles, and it is not a legal obligation. Therefore, any agreement on pension is a win for public workers. Fact 5. The MOU signed between government, the unions, and staff associations in February and March 2018 stated that the pension regime which will be implemented must be affordable and sustainable. Fact 6. The proposed pension regime for public workers employed between February 22, 1985 and December 31, 2018, as stated in the MOU, is a non-contributory pension plan. Therefore, no deductions will be taken from workers' salaries to finance their pension from government. Pensioners also benefit from any future negotiated salary increases. Fact 7. It was agreed by all parties that a worker's annual pension would be a minimum of 70% of their final salary to be paid jointly by the NIS and the government of Grenada. Fact 8. Government is not obligated to offer an advanced pension payment, commonly called a gratuity. Government has proposed to make an advanced pension payment of 2% of full pension, an amount it can practically and reasonably afford given its current and projected revenue stream. It should be noted that an advanced pension payment is a non-interest-bearing loan that the government grants to the pensioner, which must then be repaid in equal monthly installments in the form of a reduced monthly pension over 12.5 years. Fact 9. Under the proposed 2% advanced pension payment or gratuity, retirees will be entitled to a higher monthly pension than if a larger advanced payment was given. Fact 10. If the government accommodates any higher rate of gratuity, the implications would be severe for the country, as this will translate to higher taxes such as VAT, income tax and property tax, higher import duties, the possibility that hundreds of millions of dollars in grants would be lost, lower expenditure in critical areas such as healthcare, agriculture, roadworks and youth development, retrenchment of workers. These are the facts. Government is committed to an amicable resolution to the pension matter for the good of all Grenadians.
There has been a lot of discussion about the proposed changes to the pension system in Grenada. It's quite a complicated subject, so we thought we would help to explain some of the key points over a series of short videos like this one. The first thing we need to do is to understand where we are, where we have come from, and where we want to go. Grenada has emerged from one of the most successful structural adjustment programs ever, certainly in the Caribbean. The government did this while enacting programs to protect its citizens, with reductions in income tax, removal of income tax on pensions, and increases in wages. But most importantly, they did all of this without the loss of a single job. We only need to look around at our neighbours to see what a remarkable achievement this really is. Barbados, for example, had a 10-year wage freeze, and workers only received a 5% increase after elections. But this was very quickly followed by significant job cuts. In Grenada, we have had numerous increases over the last 10 years, even as we went through the structural adjustment, and again, not a single job was lost. The government has also honoured its commitments to pensioners in all cases. The case of Mrs. Armstrong proves this point. The government has honoured the interpretation of the courts and paid out all monies due to ensure that the letter of the law has been followed. Two of the main areas of concern are the issue of gratuities and the issue of retirement age, and we're going to do separate videos to explain each of these in more detail, but the main things to remember are these. A gratuity is not a bonus. It's much more like a loan. A person retiring gets to take some of their money sooner rather than later and pays this back over time. This can be both good and bad. More money now means less money later, and we will discuss the issues surrounding this in our next video. But the key thing to remember is that the percentage of the gratuity doesn't change the amount that someone will receive. It only changes the timing of when they will receive it, and that too much too soon will leave too little later on. In relation to the second item, retirement age, it is no secret that everyone is living longer, and much of this is due to better healthcare, better nutrition, a safer working environment, and other government policies that protect people and help them to live longer and more active lives. That's the important part. People aren't just living longer, they're aging more slowly, and many still want to contribute beyond the current retirement age. Grenada has actually been rather late in changing its retirement age. Dominica is at 62. Trinidad and Jamaica are at 65. and in Barbados, the current age of retirement is now 67. There is also another matter of fiscal prudence. Because people are living longer in retirement, the total amounts paid out by government are increasing, and this needs to be balanced against the money that is coming in to ensure that each and every Grenadian can receive the retirement benefits that they are entitled to. And in many ways, that is what this discussion is all about. We need to ensure that whatever policies we agree to now are sustainable, and that they will work now and into the future. Let's think about all these things seriously and look at all angles. If you do, you will see the constraints that we must work within to achieve our overall objectives of ensuring that everyone has enough money to live comfortably in retirement. When you put it all together, it becomes fairly clear that the government's proposed solutions are very close to the ideal and are the best way forward for Grenada. Let's keep working together for the best of Grenada.
Stay in the know with NNP. Get updated.
Are you having problems with a government department or statutory body? Have you been a victim of unreasonable delay, abuse of power, unfair procedures, negligence, discrimination, arbitrary or unreasonable procedures? The Ombudsman may be able to give you some help. The Office of the Ombudsman was established to provide assistance to persons who believe that they have suffered injustice or abuse at the hands of officers employed by government ministries or a statutory body. Give us a call today on telephone numbers 435-9315 or 9316, or walk into our offices during the hours of 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. Our motto speaks for itself: justice and fairness for all.
A most historic freedom time. The people have freely rose with dignity, rose up from oppression, rose up from iniquity and shame, from the darkness of desecration, shaking up paralysis and corruption, tyranny, violence and subjugation. To shine out before the Caribbean and strike terror into repressive regime and scrupulous politicians, and now trembling in their hands. Stand up, Grenada. Stand up again, Grenadian. Don't let nobody come in and dictate your course of action. All of them who oppose your revolution are political bandits just like you in their own island. Fight for your rights. Protect what you have. You fought a good fight. Protect what you have. Don't give in a single inch. Don't retreat, not even a pinch. Don't compromise your revolution. For the scandalous TV lovers with political scams in the Caribbean. No way, never right. No constitutionality, but only to export the hypocrisy.
And good morning to Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique once again. It is time for Hard Talk. 35 minutes after the hour of 10 o'clock on the Spice Isle of Grenada. Devon, how are you doing?
Well, not too bad, and a beautiful weather this morning. I'm feeling much better.
And we do have a guest in with us.
And we do have a guest.
Yeah. Introduce the guest, Devon. Those who are not seeing on video, they'll hear now.
This morning we have a special guest, a stalwart in labor issues, a senator for over 25 years, and now the president of the Senate for the last 6 or 7 years.
Is that long? 5 years, 6 years? How long now?
For what?
president of the
President
Senate,
of
how
the
long
Senate?
now?
President, well, I came in 2014, so it's 5 years.
Yeah,
5 or 6 years now.
Yeah. So Devon is right in terms of the time frame.
The only person who has been in Parliament longer than you,
Is Dr. Mitchell.
Dr. Mitchell.
Yes.
Just by a few years.
Yeah, just a couple of years.
Yeah, it's actually, Dr. Mitchell is actually, I first came into Parliament in 1990.
Yes.
1990.
And he came in 1984. So he has 6 years. 6 years ahead of me.
Yeah.
Yes, so, Senator Chester Humphrey, good morning and welcome to Hard Talk.
Well, good morning to the Hard Talk crew. Comrade Devon is how I knew you. And,
Still is.
That has not changed.
Never changed.
And I always refer. I do an American on Sheldon. I always refer to him as Senator Scott. He knows the reasons why. Because he was one of the freshman senators that really impressed me in terms of his debating skills and so on. Most people come into Parliament as freshmen very frigid and very timid. No doubt he had some butterflies in his stomach, but
yes,
he didn't show it.
Yeah.
And he got into the pace of things rather very quickly. He was a very good, agile batsman with a good eye for the ball. And so I always refer to him in those things. But he was kind of rather unique.
Thank you, sir.
Because my conceptualization of the maintaining of order in the Parliament, because he came there with a Rastaman hairstyle, and many sessions I was trying to work out how do I approach this guy. But anyway, no lasting damage was done. In fact, no damage was done actually. And I guess we have these cultural changes that
the Locks leave and the Whigs leave right after.
Yeah, but I was just about to tell the Senator, it's a good thing you didn't make remarks, because at that time on your head was something that, that you was really not for.
Well,
that is a whole other.
Yeah, I want to get into the meat of the matter, because you know when we have Senator Humphrey, you usually end up having to go over time. So Senator Humphrey, a lot has happened since the last time you were here, really, and there have been developments in the economy, industrial relations, different policy matters, and so on. Regional matters as well that I know you'd like to opine on. And I know you're not here to speak on behalf of the government of Grenada. But could you give us, just take your personal view on a wide range of events and activities and actions that have taken place?
Thank you, Sheldon. Let me just reinforce what you said. I am not a member of the government. I'm a member of Parliament. I belong to a different branch. So I'm not here to speak for the government or on behalf of the government, but I certainly will speak about the government. And I'm pretty upfront in most things. It's a government that I support. It's a government that I believe at this juncture in our history is the best collection of governmental administrators we have at this time. Not only in strict politics, but as we examine the achievements on the economic front, you would see why I say so. All right, so
I'd like to start off though on one of the issues that I know that you're very well versed in, and I think any Grenadian would know that you're very well versed in, the issue of labor. Listening to our International Workers' Day celebrations, /May Day, /Labor Day, whichever one you want to call it. Listening to the celebrations, listening to some of the trade union leaders, and listening to some other elements in the country, they've been asking for you to speak out on labor relations and what is taking place with labor relations in the country at this time. What do you have to say in relation to all of this?
Well, let me begin first by saying I served the labor movement for 40 years. And I achieved the highest levels within the formal structures of organized labor. I am the first and only Grenadian to have served in the administrative leadership of the Caribbean Congress of Labour, which covers a vast territory of the Caribbean, from Bermuda in the north to Suriname in the south, and to the east, taking in Belize and the ABC Islands. And during my time, we'd even established relations with the unions in Haiti and in the Dominican Republic, and so on. When I took over the organization as its general secretary, I was elected unopposed. When my name was floated as the person to become general secretary, nobody else entered that race. So I became de facto. And in fact, for the 2 terms that I served, each time I was elected totally unopposed. All right. But there came time for me I demitted the office at my own pace, because I felt that I was coming to the end of my formal trade union life, and I was engaging on a bigger plane, right, outside of the labor movement, and I thought that I'd reach a stage where I could do much more for the labor movement than just remaining in its confines and so on. Yeah, I have heard the call. In fact, some of these calls were even ridiculous. One colleague of mine in the labor movement went so far as to ask me to respect workers' rights. I didn't know what he meant by that. I'm not an employer. I hold no role in the labor movement. I'm a retired trade unionist, right? So I hold no role. I am a member of Parliament, holding the highest position in Parliament other than that of the Prime Minister. I'm the President of the Senate. And therefore, being the President of the Senate, my main responsibility is to maintain the order and decorum of this very important institution. It's the second branch of co-equal branch of the state, of the governance of the state. And as President of the Senate, I can't descend into partisan quarrels between people and get down on the ground. I mean, really, the people who make this claim that they're not hearing me and so on, I think they're doing so, I believe, more out of ignorance, but there's some degree of malice in it. But I think primarily out of ignorance. I led the Technical and Allied Workers Union for many, many years. I built it up from a small organization to the largest trade union in Grenada. Its international prestige and regional prestige has been unsurpassed. There's not a single trade union movement, single trade union in Grenada today that's had the regional and international reach of the Technical and Allied Workers Union. Evidence of that is I've just been appointed in December to the Carriacou Economic Commission, and all the heads of government were singularly agreed on my appointment. All right? And as I said, twice elected unopposed to lead the Caribbean Congress of Labour. And I would like to believe that I did a very progressive job with a lot of achievements, because when we took the organization over, it was flat on its back. And we were able to get a major project financing from the European Union. Right, I think the total value of this must be just under $4 million US, and we did so jointly with the Caribbean Employers Confederation, right, for reorganization of the CCL, institutional strengthening, and that money came through the CARIFORUM program. I traveled several times to Europe, to the European Union headquarters. I met with several leading, not just only trade unionists, but prime ministers. I traveled the union up and down. I got the CCL to re-enter into the CARICOM Heads of Governments Conference. We were able, when I took over the CCL, its operating infrastructure was the size of this room. When I took over the CCL, its operating infrastructure, it was housed in a very small room in the headquarters of the National Union of Public Workers in Barbados. the CCL had by and large fallen off the regional radar. Right? When I took over the CCL and when I demitted office, the CCL had its own headquarters, independent headquarters, which was fully furnished, which had all the up-to-date IT platforms. I was holding regional conferences without us having to travel. All right. It was fully equipped with all the computers and aviation equipment and all of that. We were returned to attending the Heads of Government Conference. The initiatives which were made in respect of British American and the loss of pension by workers, British American and Carriacou, that initiative was initiated by myself and the then President, David Messiah. We organized and got the heads of government to agree to intervene to try to save the workers' pensions and things that was lost with the collapse of this organization. And we did a tremendous amount of things. We restored the CCL News magazine, which was circulated all over the world. The very first Congress that I attended, we had participants coming all the way from the International Confederation of Trade Unions of the People's Republic of China. We had the Cuba Trade Union Center, and some 15 or so different observers and unions from up and down the region, etc. So I say this to say that when those who make statements like Humphrey respect workers' rights, I am not an employer, so I'm not in a position to violate the rights of workers. I hold no government post. I'm not employed with the government. I'm a parliamentarian, right? As I say, and the office that I hold requires me to follow certain kinds of protocols. After all, the office is the third highest position in the state, following the Governor General, the Prime Minister. So you can't expect me, right, to enter into this partisan. I mean, from time to time, I will give quiet advice if I'm asked. All right. So that explains why it is that I have kept completely silent on this matter. That is not to say I don't have an opinion. I have very strong opinions on the issues. I have very strong opinions on where the labor movement is now. I have very strong opinions as to whether or not the strategy and tactics of the labor movement is correct in the period that we are in. I have a very strong position on those. And, I have to be very careful. And I speak to people, quite a number of people from the labor movement check me from time to time. Even on the pension issue, when it reached a very critical position, I was quietly asked to intervene, and I did so rather reluctantly, and I can tell you, it brought an immediate change to a number of things. I can't go into these details because all of this was done rather confidentially, and it will be inappropriate for me to, engage.
Senator Humphrey, you have spent, most of your working years representing workers and so in the trade union movement and so. What is your take on the present state of the trade union movement, right, in Grenada? And secondly, how do you view the present industrial relation that is between the Public Workers Union and government? What can you share on that?
Again, I have to be guided what I said earlier, so I have to tread very cautiously on this one. It's almost like Princess, what's her name? The one who got killed in France there.
Diana.
It's almost like Princess Diana going through the minefield. No, you remember she was the one who, the fight against anti-personnel mines. So I have to tread as cautiously as this. First of all, I think the overall industrial relations situation, taking the unions that operate with state employees, I think overall the situation is fairly quite stable. There are some issues, but by and large, the situation is stable if you just take that segmental part out of it. And I think, by and large, the framework has been established for very positive engagement with organized labor and the state. And therefore, it's unfortunate the way in which things turned out. I think that the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding on the pension issue, before I go there, let me make it clear that on the issue of pensions in respect of public officers and pensions generally, the name of Chester Humphrey is generic, beginning first with the establishment of the National Pension Plan. The National Pension, I don't like to use the word scheme because it connotates negativity, you know what I mean? But the National Pension, Social Security, all right, and how that came about and what got Bernard Court going and how we got the NIS and the fact that I served on the first board of directors and so on. So beginning with that, my name is etched into the history, all right, as a matter of fact. In respect of public officers, from the time I won my extradition appeal to the Court of Appeal, and I came out then from the detention, I did two things when I came out. And the name of Basil Harford, well, let me put it to you, the Harford family, because that family had lent itself to the labor movement. Both husband and wife were active trade unionists. And Basil Harford did something that was very unique, in that in the height of U.S. military occupation in Grenada, he made a call for my release. Something that people were scared to do because of the environment which didn't exist. This was a public officer leading the Public Workers Union, made this call. And therefore, when I was released, I went to see Basil and did two things. I went to thank him, and by extension his wife and his family, because when you get involved and you make statements and you challenge authority, it is not just you alone, you know. Your family feel the effects of that, right? Including your children and so on, because in those days there was a lot of anti-communism and people were being isolated and all of that and so on. People were being terminated in mass. I think Ruggles Ferguson is the youngest pensioner Grenada has ever had. Right? He was terminated, etc., 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 right? And the question of the restoration of pension was a matter that I raised. But shortly thereafter, Basil became Clerk of Parliament, demitted office from the Public Workers Union, and then Charlie Francis became his president. And Charlie took up this issue and we started to run with it. But unfortunately, Charlie didn't stay very long as president. And then Lorette Clarkson came in, and then the issue and so on. All of the changes, for example, the reduction in the time to qualify for pension, I was at the forefront of that struggle. In fact, I drafted the provision, all right, which was then adopted. Georgie Maguire was then the Minister of Labor on these matters and so on. So as I said, history will show, including having Tau play a major role, because when we brought the other unions together, and Hudson Macphail, who was a president of the teachers union, will tell you this, as well as Antoine, who died, will tell you that I had always been focused on the restoration of these pensions for state employees, right, and played a significant role. When we took the matter to the Constitutional Court, right, the PWU was engaged in side discussions with the state of bringing in an alternative pension. I opposed that single-handedly and said to them, from a strategic and tactical point of view, you're putting the cart before the horse. Let us first exercise and determine our rights in respect to the Constitution on this matter before we start to engage government. Right? In fact, they brought in a guy, the ILO or one UN agency brought in a guy, I believe he was from Sri Lanka, to hold a meeting on setting up this alternative pension. I, as the then president of Tau, because I fundamentally disagreed with that approach and strategy, I boycotted the meeting. I didn't go, and nothing significant came out of those talks. All right, until ultimately we went to the Constitutional Court, and we went to the Constitutional Court, and again I can tell you, it was our efforts to have Dr. Francis Alexis lead that charge. Right, Tau, who had very few workers, because the workers that we represent in the public service are in fact a minority, even up until now.
Mm-hmm.
If Tau has 100 members of all the public officers, who and interestingly, it is Tau that has been having the leadership of the struggle. So it tells you, and I mean that didn't happen overnight, right? When we went to the Constitutional Court, excuse me, with Mrs. Hermlin, Armstrong, and won. All right. Again, there were some internal issues which I don't want to get into at this point. All I want to say is the question of pension restoration, my fingerprints are written all over it. All right. And when I demitted office, we were at a point in which we had mapped out how we are going to deal with this issue, because while the court ruled in principle in our favor, we felt that the judgment had certain defects and needed to be corrected. And we laid out a pathway of how to do this. Unfortunately, well, as I said, things change. The new leaders never really followed the pathway. I notice now that they've gone back to what myself and Adrian, Madonna had demitted office, so Adrian Francis came on board. And when we went to the Constitutional Court, Madonna was still the president of PWU and was president of the TUC. I never assumed or went for the president of the TUC. I thought it was incorrect. Right? I always felt that somebody of a more social democratic nature, whether it is a Clarkson or so, would be better leading, because it was clear in my mind that if Humphreys at the head of a demonstration and the riot police are called out, which has happened on several occasions, the first head to be bloodied will be Humphrey. It will be very difficult to bloody the head of Clarkson, excuse me, who is a well-known religious figure, a woman, a senior person. Madonna is very celebrated and outstanding Catholic, very deep in her religion. It would be hard to bloody your head with a baton. So it was better that they had the formalities of leadership rather than myself. And that was the strategic and tactical thinking in terms of this. In fact, I should tell you that Madonna became president of the TUC. And Ifrey Roberts is honest, he can confirm that. On my urgings, I took Ray and went into Madonna's home and persuaded her when Derek Allard died that she should assume the leadership, and that's how it all happened. I mean, we've worked very closely. Madonna and I have a very, very, very close relationship. As I tell you, my relationship with the Harford family is very personal, right? Simply by the act that Basil Harford, an outstanding Grenadian, trade unionist, and a family trade unionist, did, right? And I owe them a debt of gratitude for that. I know I'm being a bit long-winded, so you'll have to kind of rein me in, right? When I the question, I kind of lost track, but I'm saying essentially, therefore, I have my own views on how things have panned out. But let me make this point here. We entered a watershed moment in June, July of 2012. A watershed moment in the history of labor relations was entered in June, July 2012. When by a simple act, a letter signed by Dr. Mitchell, then leader of the opposition, came to me as president of the General of the Technical and Allied Workers Union, asking for a meeting between the new National Party and Tau. And you know the history that went down between these two organizations. I mean, we were the official opposition to the NNP. And I myself, but always made it clear that I had no personal issues with Dr. Mitchell. And you have repeated it, Devon, you would have heard me say so. As I said before.
Anyone listening you in Parliament.
As I said before, I fought NNP and Mitchell on the basis of principles, not on the basis of personality, because if the truth be known, I owe him a debt of gratitude, because he's the only person in the H.A. Blaze cabinet who stood up and opposed my extradition. He's the only person who did that.
Yes.
He's the only person during the high point of the anti-communist, anti-revolutionary period of U.S. military occupation and control. He's the only person who came out and said, look, I will hire Cuban graduates because these graduates come from the same social class as me. In other words, had there been possibilities of going to Cuba when I was a young student, I would have gone to Cuba and studied, because that's the only possibility open to me as a poor boy. And he hired them in the face of the most virulent, anti-patriotic, anti-period that we went in following the collapse and the occupation. So this letter comes asking for a meeting. And I took the letter, studied it, and we decided, yes, we will meet. And at that meeting was the defining moment. Grenada had entered a new phase in its social development and the development of the working class movement. I'm beginning to write my memoirs, and I will talk and give a great analysis on this, because I want to say something to you here. Within the first 24 months of the NNP coming back into office, as a result of that engagement, because in that engagement, we put 26 industrial relations demands on the table, and the NNP accepted all and implemented them. And they were out of power, right? That meeting laid the basis, both psychologically and otherwise, that when the second 15-0 came, when Mitchell spoke to his supporters, and again, you know that this is a fact, in the 2013 election, I stayed away from the polls. Right? When he made what is, and he himself said so, Dr. Mitchell has said so time and time again, that he did not know what overcame him. He didn't have a written script, but it's the way he felt that, boy, I can't put this country back on track. I can't build Grenada. I can't leave my most positive legacy behind. Trying to do this alone. I need national unity. And he made the call. And who did he call? He didn't call on private sector. He didn't call on farmers. He called on two personalities, which essentially is the labor movement. He called on Madonna Harford. And notice the order in which he called them. Say, I'm calling on Madonna Harford. After all, she was president of the TUC. She was president of the Public Workers Union, and Chester Humphrey to come forward and help me undertake this task. And that's right there and then the concept of Project Grenada begun to unfold, right? And as I say, it's a defining moment, because most of the most significant gains that the workers have gained in this country came out of that June-July meeting of 2012. Don't forget, the first implementation of the commitment given by Dr. Mitchell was the return of all of the workers who were dismissed in Lotto under the sexual harassment issues. And not only were the workers returned, but they were returned with full rights and benefits. Thereafter, by May, the then Minister of Labour, the Honorable Elvin Nimrod then, made the announcement. Because remember, Grenada was bleeding jobs. Banks were closing. Cable and wireless was collapsing in what is the organization. Hundreds of workers were being retrenched. And we made the call for the removal of income tax and severance pay in order to help the working class in this country. The elections was towards the end of February. March, April. Within 2 months of coming into office, Dr. Mitchell announced through his Minister of Labour, the Deputy Prime Minister, Evelyn Nimrod, in the May Day rally we had in St. David, in the Lassages playing field. And when Evelyn went up to speak, the workers started hissing to boo. Right? They started hissing to boo. And he made the announcement that the government shall retroactively remove income tax on severance pay. Because remember, in the desperate situation that NDC and Mr. Burke found themselves, in the last year, in the unfinanced budget it was presented, they then gave this temporary relief, but it was sunsetted so that it came to an end on the 31st of December 2012. And so from the 1st of January 2013, as more workplaces closing, the workers were being taxed 30% of everything over $80,000. So that was a second deliverable. No, as I said to you before, to speed up, if you look at what the workers have been able to achieve, removal of income tax on severance pay, removal of personal income tax on your pension, on your national insurance plan, the largest single block of workers ever given permanent tenure in the history of the Grenada Public Service, including the entire colonial period. The largest block of money ever paid out, including even the period. Because let me say, while we got the 30% or so increase under the period of when we shake up Blaze, and then under the period of the revolution before, the net sum of money never reached that amount. Within 36 months, the state paid out over $112 million just to one group of workers. So, in other words, not only this, the cabinet had taken the decision that they're going to challenge the decisions of the Constitutional Court. And I simply picked up the phone and reminded Dr. Mitchell of his covenant coming out of the July meeting of 2012. And we had a discussion. And he said to me, Chess, this is a big one, because they're long-term money. Because Timothy Antoine had did an initial assessment. And we were talking about a debt of over $1 billion that would be added to the state thing. He said, boy, this is a big thing. I don't know. Bab. Anyway, we spoke. At the end of the day, what did Mitchell do? Mitchell adopted the restoration of pension as his state public policy. No other government, including NDC that was there 4.5 or 5 years earlier, did that. They didn't do it when Brizan and the early NDC was in office. They didn't do it when the NDC had not yet formed, but its seeds were part of the coalition called the NNP then. And George Brizan, remember George Brizan was Minister of Finance? The leader of the NDC was Minister of Finance. They didn't do it then. But for the first time, no. What does that say? It says that you have a government that is delivering to the working class. And let me tell you something. We didn't wage no fair struggle for none of these things, We didn't have any strikes. We didn't have any things. We didn't have any. The government agreed. The MOU was signed. Right? Some people said that the MOU represented a sellout. I don't share that view at all. I don't share. It was a marvelous achievement by the workers. At least that's how I felt. As I said, I didn't speak. I could speak about it now because it's no longer an issue. The unions have decided that they're going back to the Constitutional Court. So the matter is not an oozing matter. So I'm not creating any prejudice if I give what my views are. In the height of the struggle, I could not give my views. I ought not to have given my view, and I did that. I remained on the sideline and looked at it. But I'm saying, having documented for you now, empirically, all that the workers were being given by the state under the administration. I can't speak of the NNP prior to 2013. I don't know about them. I wasn't there. I had no relationship. My relationship with them was confrontational, right? It was adversarial, etc., etc., etc. The other major thing that happened is where we failed with a comrade as a Minister of Finance. I already want to make that point. And his key economic advisor, who was a member of the Central Committee of the NJM. You hear the construct? A member of the Central Committee of the NJM. He was a minister of health in the revolutionary government. He became the principal advisor to Nazem Burke, who was then the Minister of Finance, who served briefly in the Ministry of Finance under Bernard Court. The talks about a social compact collapsed. Within 12 months of taking office or thereabout, the new National Party signed an accord with the labor movement and the employers. And we had the first ever, Grenada became the second country in the entire Carriacou region to sign a social compact accord. So you see, I'm pointing out all of these pointers to you to show to you that where you have the administrators of the state demonstrating to you in a practical way that I will accommodate labor, I will try to do for labor to improve the well-being of the workers and so on, where all of these far-reaching economic consequential things are being considered, have been adopted as state policy. And let me point out, during that time, the banking crisis which started when the NNP was in opposition and which continued to some degree when they came, coming out of the tremendous struggle we had regionally, and the first trans-regional trade union negotiating team in the history of the Caribbean, involving myself, involving Bobby Morris as chief negotiator, myself as deputy, David Messiah, and 3 other comrades. We negotiated a $40 million US exit packet by Barclays when Barclays was pulling out from the region, and it created a banking business, First Caribbean, in partnership with the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. They adopted the Grenadian law as the model, as the standard that they would carry. And we got Barclays to accept using the Grenadian law, which has its foundation in the revolution. Don't never forget that the Trade Union Recognition Act was the basis of all of this. And it enshrined a fundamental principle which we achieved since slavery. And it defined what a free man is. You could sell your business, you can't sell the worker. The last act of the sale of a person happened at the point of the abolition of slavery in 1834. That's to tell you how fundamental that is. And the law made it absolutely clear that if you're selling your business, the worker has a right to determine whether he will demand termination and termination allowance and go his merry way, or whether he would elect to work with the new employer.
As a rollover, okay.
You could sell your business, you could sell your capital, but you can't treat workers. No. Coming out of that Barclays issue, the bankers in the region then got together in a campaign to decide to roll back that law. And the Banking Act of 2012 or 2011, whenever it was passed, the bankers were successfully able to get into that Banking Act an abolition of that principle, which is fundamental in the Labor Code of Grenada. When Mitchell came back into office, I went to see him and pointed this out to him, and he said, we have to get our other colleagues in the region. I went up to see Kenny Anthony. Kenny Anthony refused to go along. He said, look, I have to act in concert with my other colleagues. But hear what? We are under pressure by the international multilateral companies, IMF, etc., whatever, to pass this bit of legislation. Right? We're under pressure and so on. Our central bank is under pressure to have this legislation passed and so on. We don't have sufficient time. I went up to see Ralph in St. Vincent. As a matter of fact, I will be in St. Vincent shortly, invited by Dr. Gonzalez. He's launching a new book, and he wants me to be one of 3 speakers. All right? And I went to Prime Minister Mitchell, and he said, look, Chess, I give you the undertaking that we're going to do a significant review of this, and we're going to make the necessary changes. Well, I demitted office, and from my inquiries, and I had to be careful here, from my inquiries, the necessary follow-up, which should have been done. And I'm saying to you, all of this, the government agreed to. All right? All of this, the government agreed to. There are 2 major issues I dealt with before the meeting office. The Postal Corporation matter, in which, when the initial sum of payout was to be done, it was 2-point-something million. We end up with almost $13 million after we finished. And let me tell you something. We had industrial action. The workers never lost a single cent in pay. The workers never lost a single cent in pay. We had several weeks of industrial action. In the breweries, remember 2 events occurred. First, there was a strike, and then there was a lockout for 66 days. Tau paid the workers?
Yeah.
Tau paid the workers? You remember how fierce that struggle was?
Yeah.
You remember we put an embargo on the company and set up a tent outside, and nothing could go in, nothing could go out? It's the fiercest trade union struggle since 1951. And you know, the workers ultimately were victorious. Every single worker, after 66 days of lockout, in which the company did not pay the workers a cent leading up to Christmas, Tau paid. We paid out, it won't be proper for me to call the figure, but it is, we had to pay out like if it was a state. And we paid the workers for every single day of that strike. And then we paid them in respect of the period of lockout. During that period of lockout, we held a meeting with the New National Party. Its headquarters was then on Tyrrell and Scott Street opposite the YWCA.
Yeah.
When we held that meeting, the meeting was led by Dr. Mitchell. It had Clarice Charles, Einstein Louison, Dwight Horsford, all of them assembled inside there. NNP was in opposition. And NNP gave me the undertaking that they're supporting the workers and the struggle. When we did, historically, for the first time in the history of this parliament, I introduced a private member's bill to amend 66-1. We succeeded. The NNP voted solidly, and we succeeded in the amendment. In the Senate, when it went to the House, it was killed by Mr. Burke, and the rest is history, so it has never been amended. I'm saying all this to say, when a political party demonstrates concretely by its actions, not only by its vocalization, but by its actions, that it is pro-worker, when you have an issue that is intractable, there's a particular way in which you deal with it. And that's all I would like to say on that. I'm not making any pronouncements. All I'm saying to you is this, that first of all, the MOU I thought was a beautiful document. It had some defects in it, and I think my trade union colleagues understood the defects. But of course, people are human, but it was a good document. The government has since gone ahead, notwithstanding the fact that the labor unions have announced that this is no longer an industrial relations problem. They made that announcement. And I say, but welcome to 2011. Welcome to 2011. Because when Adrian and I and so mapped out how are we going to deal with this restoration struggle, we had it well worked out. We worked out with Alexis how we going to do what we had to do, etc., 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 etc. All right? And so for me, in respect of the industrial relations situation, I think the workers have a great advantage in that they have, and notwithstanding this hiccup that has occurred because of so on. But when I hear some of my former colleagues calling for Peter David to be fired as Minister of Labour, I just had to shake my head. And, you know, I shake my head because, you know, I may have to borrow a phrase from the Bible. People might think I'm hypocritical, but people best understand by things that they believe and so on. You know, and I say to myself, forgive them. They know not what they do. All right? And, you know, I say to myself, all one has to do is to go to GBN and speak to a worker who was terminated unfairly. A matter which I was grieving and advising on, and which was resolved in the worker's favor. Right? And he got a substantial compensation. Right? How do you ask to remove a man whose entire life has been
for the people?
In other words, this is not a guy who's playing politics. This guy entire life, and he born with wealth.
Yeah, you don't need wealth.
He don't need to do what he's doing. But his entire life has been helping ordinary people, the sons and daughters of workers who fall victim to the laws of the state. And you're going to sit there and demand that the man be fired? Huh? You refuse to go in front of him. When he called you, he says, look, come to me now, let's see how we could resolve this. You refuse to go. Right? Now, throughout my entire trade union history, the records would show I have never refused to negotiate. I have never refused to negotiate. So, as I said, overall, the industrial situation outside of this hiccup, because it's a big hiccup, people are very emotional about it and so on, and that's understandably so. But I'm saying that there is a significant positive for the workers in that they have a political administration that is worker-friendly.
I'd like to take a short break. It's 24 minutes after the hour of 11 o'clock. I think there's a wonderful time just to take a short breather and come up for some air. So, folks, we're going to be right back. Don't move a muscle.
I wrote my last song. I put my pens down. Appointment with the studio. I start recording tomorrow. But this lady called out to me. She said, Bubba, you can't finish so quickly. Please sing us a commentary about your partner Chester Humphrey. I say, lady, not me. Better you check Glenwell or Gilvey. Who is that Latouche or Squeezy? They might be willing to confront him. She say, boy, you the master of commentary. And just think I so for we. melody, the lyrics you getting from me. He could take it cause it's just well lined. Chester Humphrey in charge. In Grenada, I like Satan Ramesh Maharaj. Chester Humphrey in charge. This one man could close down the whole country because he got.
Yes, indeed, folks. Yeah, you know how it goes. Sometimes you have to take a short break. And hey, we need to say a special good morning to our listeners out there in Brooklyn, listening via 94.9 FM out there in Brooklyn. We have a significant number of people also in North Carolina that are listening out there in California, Pancho and the others out there in California that are listening. Those of you in Texas, Houston, Texas, wherever you are and you're listening to Hard Talk, we say a special good morning to you. Our listeners in Carriacou via 92.9 and those here in Grenada via CRFM 89.5 and 97.5. And then our online listeners, we're seeing the numbers building there. Remember to like and share the live. And those of you on YouTube as well and those on the website. So we're all over. So, Devon.
Yes. Senator Humphrey, I think you undoubtedly would be the most, experienced person to talk about LIAT. All right? In my view, over the years, you have been right there with the workers from Grenada way up to the south. What is your view on the present state of LIAT and perhaps your recommendation as we move forward?
Well, first of all, let me say that I am deeply thankful and grateful to the government for a radical change in its position on LIAT. And it has been a work long in progress. All right? And it's the most sensible thing to do. The government has realized the importance of this institution. The institution has gone through a lot. It has faced a lot of difficulties. But it is not an institution you can do without. LIAT brings in the single largest amount of passengers into this country. I think LIAT passenger throughput in Grenada is more than all the wide-body aircrafts put together that come, whether it is British Airways, Virgins, American Airlines, and all of them. The fact of the matter is that LIAT is the equivalent of our minibus service. And without it, if all the minibuses were taken off the route and people sold the minibuses and they pulled them out from minibus to maybe just go and drive tourists and do nothing else, that gives you an idea of what will happen to the economy if LIAT moves out. I have heard the detractors who translate everything into this narrow anti-NNP politics about Mitchell shouldn't go and spend this money and blah, blah, blah. Well, they don't know what this is ignorance talking. Excuse me, they don't know what they're talking about because the amount of money that LIAT generates in the Grenada economy is far in excess of the $1 million. And I have been preaching for many years that there were just 3 treasuries that were responsible for LIAT. Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Antigua. Right? LIAT fares are high. There's no doubt about that, but they're not exorbitant. LIAT still does not charge the economic costs. Even with these high fares, it's not the economic cost that you're being charged. We have open skies. American Airlines were competing with LIAT. They brought in American Eagle. And what happened to them? People are saying privatize LIAT, but LIAT was privatized before. LIAT was sold to a conglomerate of Caribbean businessmen and some from outside the region. Yeah. And within 2 years, the governments had to take it back. Because the private sector lost their shirt in the business. The last private sector venture is RedJet. Remember RedJet out of Barbados? How long did that last? That didn't last as long as drinking a red sweet drink. It collapsed. it collapsed. And so the fact of the matter is Caribbean governments have to wake up to the fact that LIAT is our mass transit. And there is not a single mass transit system any part of the world, whether it's the New York transit system, whether it's the British Underground, whether it's in Moscow. There is not a mass transit system any part of the world that is not subsidized by the state. Because you can't look at it only at its enterprise level. You have to look at how it connects to the rest of the economy. and the value of wealth that it creates by that connectivity, but bringing the economy together, right? And as small island states, you need inter-airline travel. People have talked about a ferry, but that's even more expensive and inefficient. When I jump on board Liat, I get to Trinidad in 35 minutes. A ferry is going to take you several hours to get there. If you have any medical emergency, then you'll either have to charter a plane to do it. You couldn't do it by going by the ferry. So the ferry is a sort of wishy-washy pie in the sky sort of thing, an excuse for not, excuse for funding Liat properly. So what needs to happen? People are saying that there are too many taxes on Liat. That's true. But if you remove the taxes, what happens? We in the OECS, I would say even in Carriacou, we have the highest per capita rate of international airports than even in the United States. Take just in the OECS alone. The OECS population is less than 1 million people. Less than 1 million people. There is no state in the OECS that has 200,000 people, right? So it's just about 600,000 or 700,000. How many airports they have? International airports. Grenada, no. St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Antigua, St. Kitts, right? We have 5 international airports, and then you must add Barbados in the mix, because Barbados is a central point in connecting. So just serving a population of about 700 and something thousand people, or a little more than that, 800,000 people, you have 6 international airports. Let's take the state of New York. Just in the New York area alone, you have 2, LaGuardia and Kennedy. So we have a higher per capita density of airports. What does that mean? It means, therefore, cost to maintain these, and our ratings are pretty high. Our ratings they rank airports according to, they give them certain ratings which talk about the safety and all of these things, and the equipment that you have to get, right? A fella put a bomb in his shoe, you have to have new scanning equipment to scan shoes, and this equipment is not cheap. This is significantly expensive equipment that you have to get. A fella put a bomb now in the belt, you have to change your equipment. So you have all these body scanners and all of this thing. Fellas now trafficking cocaine now in liquid. You have to have, so it's very expensive. And take Grenada, most of the airports in the region, I can't speak about them with the authority, but in Grenada context, the state doesn't finance the airport operations, it's self-financing. And where does it get it from? It gets it from those taxes and navigational aids and different things like that. When you take that away, you have to find a replacement so that the ticket prices may fall. But could the states, Grenada has just come out, and Barbados is now in a structural adjustment program, right? Where are you going to get the funding? So it's the thing is this, that yes, ticket prices need to go down, but then the states need to provide a subsidy to Liat. And I think the new configurations, what they are doing, because we do it for the wide-body aircraft. When an airplane leaves Gatwick, British Airways or Virgin leaves Gatwick, and the passengers earmarked for this region here, aircraft coming with 300 passengers, but only 100 and something people book. We had to pay for the rest of the seats. We are doing that for the foreign airlines, but we won't do it for our own. And you expect us to make these uneconomic runs and service you as somebody's got to pay. And we reach a stage now where the governments, Barbados, for example, because of its current economic situation, cannot put in more money. And so other governments must come to the rescue. And that is the way in which Liat would survive. Because remember, they had to refleet Liat recently.
Yeah.
Right? Because the Dash 8s had outlived their time. Liat has an impeccable safety record. One of the best safety records in the world.
Yeah.
Liat gonna reach late. They wouldn't bring your baggage, but you're going to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And therefore, that has to be cost. That's a cost factor in itself. Right? So that it's a good move by the Grenada government. It sends the right signal. I just hope that after the mid-year review, that is now must be done, because if you have to make significant changes to your approved budget, you could only do so once under the new rules. And so when that is being done, it is. I am hopeful that the Grenada state will purchase equity in the airline, meaning they will put in several millions of dollars and gain equity shares in the airline. And with that money, then Liat wouldn't have to go to borrow. You follow the point I'm making? And we will find a way in which we give a standard contribution to Liat. Each of the states that Liat serve, the 15 territories that Liat serve, and that will keep the airline. Because you don't, Liat is not necessary for Liat to make a hefty profit, because it provides a kind of social economic need, right? And you have to see the impact it has on the rest of the economy. But it needs at least to break even. It needs to be able to make enough money that it can replenish its fleet or expand its fleet without having to have a sovereign injection of funds into it. And the crisis is, it also requires a restructuring. There's a lot of restructuring that has to happen. And my trade union colleagues have to bear this in mind, because the alternative is a closure of the airline, in which everybody loses their jobs. They have people who have 30 years of service in Liat. And because of the current fiscal state of Liat has no assets. The airlines, the aircrafts are by and large aircrafts owned by the Caribbean Development Bank. Liat don't own any facilities. Its headquarters isn't owned by it. It's leasing these facilities. So if the airline goes under, the receivers don't have any assets that they can sell to compensate the workers for the years of service and so on that they would have given to the airline. So
let me ask a question here, because that was the question I was coming up on. What role is the trade union movement locally and regionally playing in the discussions that are taking place around Liat right now?
Well,
I know previously, I know you used to play a role regionally.
What I did when I came into Liat, when I remember the first region-wide union meeting which was convened on the urgence of myself, and we convened that meeting in Antigua. And I went up to that meeting and I listened to my union colleagues speak. In fact, workers were not getting paid because they didn't have the money to pay. It's the worst crisis that Liat faced. It's worse than now. People weren't paid their salary, they just had no money. Liat couldn't even buy fuel. Liat had to avoid certain destinations because they were fearful of seizure of the aircraft. That was how bad the situation was. There were 2 or 3 aircrafts down. And the reason why they were down, they were cannibalizing them to find parts, because the suppliers of parts refused to supply because they were not being paid. Things were really bad in the airline. And the workers, because they were not being paid, decided that they're going to go on a region-wide strike. So we all assembled in Antigua. And I remember for the entire duration of that meeting, my colleagues were railing and planning the strike and how we're going to coordinate and so on. And I just sat there listening. And then I think it might have been the president of the pilots union said, "But Comrade Humphrey, you are unusually quiet. We haven't heard a word from you. You very usually be very robust in meetings." I said, "Colleagues, I am quiet because I am fearful of what I see unfolding. I don't know about you, but this meeting is turning out to be a negotiation between us and the grave. And we are about to sign an agreement which gives death victory over us." And they say, "Why are you speaking so in parables? Since when you talk in Bible talk?" I say again. I said, "Look, the worst thing we can do for ourselves is to go and call a strike at this time." I say, if you call a strike at this time, the airline is finished. When it's finished, would you get paid? When it's finished, would you get your severance? What is happening to your pension plan? Your pension, which you put millions of dollars in, had evaporated. I say, comrades, we can't call a strike. I say, what we want now is cooperation. I want you to appoint me as a roving person, and I go in around and speak with the prime ministers and so on. And I hopped a Liat plane and went down, a delegation of us to speak to Ralph. And out of that, we developed the consultative committee, right? And a joint committee of unions and Liat management and shareholders. And we started consulting with each other how we getting out of this crisis and what we're going to do. I then, President Jack Deo was then President of Guyana. I was then given the task to go down to speak to Jack Deo. I knew Jack Deo because of my association with Chedi and the PPP. I made an appointment with him and flew down at Liat expense to meet with him for approval for the Special Petroleum Fund by Trinidad. A Special Petroleum Fund was set up in Carriacou. And that was the only source of money that was available that we could use. But it needed the unanimity of all the heads to agree to use that fund for the purpose other than what it was set up for. And that's where Liat got that vital injection of capital. Jack there said, Comrade Humphrey, you don't have to talk no more. I convinced, I'll approve. Right? And they approved that fund. And since then, that consultative committee, right? So again, I say to my trade union colleagues, you cannot practice trade unionism and represent the workers without an understanding of the environment within which you are operating. You cannot evolve strategy and tactics without a very close consideration and examination of the pros and cons. You cannot lead people into battle unless you have a fair certainty of what the outcome is going to be. You can't engage in battle if you don't understand the terrain. You can't engage the enemy unless you understand the capacity of your soldiers to struggle. So you have to do all of these analyses. This is why I tell you, right? The workers that we've led to battle have never lost wages, and because we choose the battle based on the terrain and the contours of the terrain and our assessment of our strength and weaknesses and the strength and weaknesses of the enemy. You don't just blindly wake up one morning, and they say, "Rrr." You are leading working people who have commitments, who have children, who have ill parents depending on them. Right? You have to weigh. And then most importantly, Devon will tell you, because he was an army man, you have to brief your soldiers.
That's true.
If you're going into battle, you have to tell soldiers, look, some of you ain't coming back,
Straight up.
You can't lead people into battle. And in the middle of the battle, when people start asking you questions, you have no answers and so on. Right? And and this is why Tau was never lost a trade union battle, because we tell the workers up front. So I couldn't understand how the president who succeeded me, I don't know if he did. I would expect that he did. At least would have told the workers, if you're going to engage, you may not be paid. Because the right to withdraw your labor is a right that I will die for, because we are free men. But once you withdraw your labor, you vacate your right to be paid. And people don't understand that. In fact, Madonna Harford told the Public Workers Union that publicly in a Beyond the Headline program that was held very early before all of this strike business. A caller had called in. So you can't lead people in a situation where, and then people say, well, you have no answer. People must know above hand, and you must know these things. You must inform yourself properly. And so that you could devise, because leading people is an awesome responsibility. Yeah. It's an awesome responsibility not to be taken lightly. Now, I would not come in the middle of a struggle and make these points. As I said to you, I hope that people, well, I wish the movement well. I can't do anything other than that. I still work for and on behalf and quietly where I could do what has to be done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But on the Liat question coming back, it's a right move. And I think the governments, especially in the OECS, are waking up to the realization that they have to fund Liat. Mm-hmm. Right?
Well, since we speak about Liat and its effect on the economy, I want to get into some economic issues at this time. I know one of the things that I've heard you speak about before at the Parliament and otherwise has been the challenges that people are facing with the bus system locally. I don't know if you want to comment on that at this time.
Well,
that is something that
in our first social protocol document, we held a demand for there must be some degree of state intervention in the public transport system, right? The economy has reached a stage where you can't purely rely on a guy whose main interest is making a return on profit. The private bus person isn't doing his work for charity. He's looking at his bottom line. He owes the bank. He's looking at his bottom line because he has to supply his family. And he is not going to operate his bus inefficiently. So he's going to operate his bus at maximum times. And the times when there are few people, the bus is down. But that might be the time you want to get from point A to point B. The workers who have to work shift and work at night have to get home, right? And quite often the jobs are quite a distance away from where you live, right? So you have to have a mix of both a state-run enterprise, but then I could see the resistance of having the state-run enterprise because the things of state tend to be abused. The way to do this is to ensure that you set up a facility, you depoliticize it, and I want to emphasize that, you depoliticize this facility, you let it run on some very strict guidelines, right, and then you deal with it that way. When we had the NTS, National Transport Service, which then became the PTS, or was it PTS first and then NTS after? I can't remember. Was it the People's Transportation Service?
The People's
under the Revolution,
yeah,
was
under
PTS.
PTS.
Right?
NTS came in.
I know that there were some significant challenges. A lot had to do with pilfering of
parts
not just parts, but pilfering of fares, right? But with the new technology that we dealt with, I mean, the new technology. There are more people now paying for the telephone service than having to go the month to month, right? So, for example, the least you handle money is the less likely that there will be leakage. The least a number of people who handle money. The more people who handle money, the more likely that there would be.
Problem.
So you can set up a facility in which kids prepay, they buy the cards, and you swipe your card to get into the bus. The door will only open when your card is swiped, and it opens in one direction and it exits in the next. You follow me? I think a national school bus service is important because that will immediately bring relief to workers by reducing the amount of money that they have to spend. And you can have a universal fare. So there are a number of things, in fact, which we advocated for when I created the base document for discussion of the social protocol. I just want to recall that during the negotiations, Burke was finance minister, Chris DeRiggs was Burke advisor. I resigned from the committee, right, in protest over something which happened, and then Bert Patterson replaced me. And then the entire thing crashed. We never got a document signed. It's only when the NNP came into office, the first protocol was signed. But then I had absolutely nothing to do with it. The two people who were representing the TUC was Ray Roberts and Madonna Harford. Why they did not negotiate for some of the things which we had demanded before, only they could answer that. I don't know about it. So I think that you are right. We need to address. And I'm happy to see that Andre raised the matter. I can't remember whether I heard him on media or was in a press conference. But he did raise the matter of the need for the state to begin to look at this issue. Because the economy has changed. We are now running a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week economy. And that thing is expanding. Before it was just in electricity and just in the hospital-based medical services. Now it's all over. As tourism expands, and so on. So you have to have a public transport service that fits into those needs, and private sector would not do it. Because a guy that run all day feel it's time for he to go and lie down with his wife, and he ain't go and give nobody else the bus, so he park up.
Or some rainfall and that's
or
it.
some rainfall and that is it. Or you meet some partner and they start to drink some rum somewhere and he say, look boy, me ain't making no more trips, so that's it.
Yeah,
but the
making
economy cannot depend on such a precarious transport arrangement. So at some point, the state will have to look at how it reorganizes the transport service, introduces a state engagement in transport under an independent body that is depoliticized, but runs efficiently and effectively, right, and deal with that service. It will have to, because a modern economy cannot run on the kind of precarious structure of public transport that we have. So I just thought that, I'd make this point.
Especially since we have the expansion of the tourism sector in the south.
Precisely the point.
You at 11, 12, even 1 in the morning, you're passing by Keep Left and you meet a group of people trying to get home.
Wow, security guards. And many security guards these days are women.
Yeah.
In the security guard service. And well, the men are insisting, well, look, if you want same pay as me, then work same pay as me.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a matter that it's a matter in the economy that must be addressed, all right? As we look at how we restructure the economy, because that's a major task coming now. A major task confronting us is the restructuring of the economy. The government has gotten high marks for restructuring the state sector financing and so on, the public sector debt and all of that stuff, operating within its means, the way in which it raises revenue, assignment and use of that revenue, and so on and so on and so forth.
Let me stick up
But
there,
now we
because
need...
We're seeing 5% increase, so how do we
No,
continue
growth in the
that?
economy. Well, how do we continue that growth?
Yeah.
Right. To do so, we have to restructure the economy, and that task has not yet seriously begun in earnest. We have to make a determination. What precisely is the role of agriculture? Is traditional plantation agriculture going to do it? Right? What should the Grenada economy look like? To what extent, therefore, we need to bring in our physical planning laws to conform with where is Grenada's economy best situated in this phase of international monopoly capital, where there has been a shift in the productive forces of the world, right? And where China, because China now has the productive capacity and Southeast Asia and so on. Where do we fit into this? If you follow me, we no longer have protection for our basic agricultural commodities. We no longer have a workforce willing to work there. All the people who would have been workers on the plantation are now secondary school students with 11, 12, 15, 18 A-levels. Right? Are they prepared to do that laborious, back-breaking work? Right? What has happened to our industries like bananas and so on? They've gone out. What is happening? So we need a whole... So the task ahead of us now is great and complicated. It requires a lot of thought. How do we restructure this economy? What end of the tourism market are we going for? Are we going for high-end tourism? If we're going for high-end tourism, do we have to now zone the country? Because you can't have large areas of sub-housing coming over the mountainside, coming down on your tourism plant. Imagine you have tourism facilities that go for $4,000, $5,000 a night. You can have, when the guests look out in the back, what they see is a lot of shacks coming down with low standard and poor income housing. You can have a situation where all the dogs come down from the hills and go on the beach to eat the bones where people discard the old Kentucky and so on. The two things can. So we have to restructure this business. How do we preserve the historic nature of the city of St. George to make it unique? Because how do we preserve the maritime tropical ambience of Grenada? Because we're one of the furthest points south in the cruise tourism business. When people leave New York to come here in the winter, what are they coming to see? Are they coming to engage with nature? They coming to hear birds? They coming to see waterfalls? Now, if you let people build homes right around the waterfalls and everything become urbanized, then you lose that uniqueness that you have. right? What is the role of cruise tourism? Do we need 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 more ports? If we need that, how do we get them? Do we relocate the cargo port from where it is to some other place? How do we develop the St. George's in a harbour and around the Carriacou? If it's high-end tourism, what do we want to do with questions of high-end supply of services and goods and so on, like your crystals and your high-end, what do you want to sell? Cheap umbrellas and cheap trinklets? Or you want to do like St. Martin. Look at how St. Martin has transformed itself into high-end tourism, where it's per capita, it is GDP. And look at Singapore, small country. In 1960, Singapore economy was smaller than that of Trinidad and Tobago. Look at how they've transformed themselves now. Is there a place for Grenada utilizing its natural features to become a Singapore of the Caribbean? How do we liberate our people from the containment of poverty and so on? How do we put them on a new paradigm? How do we commercialize our carnival to attract the best? Is old oil going to do it? Is half-naked people with their genitals outside going to do it? Is this what we're selling? How do we resolve? You see, these are fundamental questions which those of us who are leaders in the state now must be confronting and sitting down and planning. How do we do these things? How do we finance these changes? Where are the resources going to come from while maintaining our fiscal discipline and so on? You see, so we have a big task ahead of us. Okay, land utilization. How do you put a 3-person office with a computer and put it on the most prized piece of real estate in the entire Caribbean? How do you set up an Olympic office on the Grand Anse, in the Grand Anse area, office that could sit here, and an office that could go in the stadium, an office that could be placed any place else? How do you utilize that valuable piece of land? So Royston Hopkins has about 200 employees. I sat on his board of pension of the workers up until recently. Right? The average income earned by a maid is about $2,000 when you average it out a month. Yes? In his hotel. Huh? How many people this Olympic office employ? What is the turnover in the economy and what's the engagement? Bad land utilization. The largest Kentucky in the world is placed a few yards away from your beach. What do you think will happen? And behind that, you have unplanned housing because people are looking for work. Because people want to come and live right next where the work is. Again, because of the precarious nature of transport. Look at the big development that is going to be unfolding in St. David with the coming of the Six Sense hotels and so on. You know, a lot of people from town going to be traveling up to St. David for work. Right? What happened when we started to develop the north of the island? We have limited land space. Right? We are making no plans at all for pedestrian traffic in this country. None. We are allowing people to build their homes dead on the road. So you walk through Belmont that has a large secondary and primary school, and the road is being choked by unregulated building. So there's no room for sidewalk or expansion. Look at the rising per capita incidence of road traffic accidents. Look at the suite of garages that are being built all on the road, park anywhere with old junk vehicles all over the place. Look at the plywood shops that are springing up on every piece of road where a sidewalk could go. It requires a disciplined approach to the development of our economy in a well thought out. Well, the government has started, I think it's a 2030 plan or whatever it is. Yeah. That plan needs to be hastened. We need to, because the growth is going to slow. Right? And we have to begin, as I said, the transformation of the Grenadian economy. That work we haven't begun in earnest.
Okay. Senator Humphrey, it's now 12 o'clock. Usually we finish at 12, but I can't finish without asking you this question. And it is the Venezuela question. I must ask you for your views on what is taking place right now. And remember, the views expressed by Senator the Honorable Chester Humphrey are his own views. But I know as a regionalist that you have a view, and I want to hear you.
Well, my views accord with some of the things that the government is doing, but I also want to touch on two issues too before I get there.
No problem.
First of all, I want to touch on the NIS and the fact that the NIS needs recalibrating. Well, the NIS has begun to do some very important work in that regard. I saw they have a cartoon explanation out, very professionally done, good. The unions need to get on board in promoting this thing, because if you don't do this recalibration of the NIS, ultimately what will happen, it will collapse. So there's no choice. You have a choice. You could you could choose to do nothing, as we have been doing over the years, and time is catching up with you. And then when you eventually decide to do something, it's like a patient who suffers with diabetes. If you didn't start to control your diabetes, all right, ultimately what will happen to you, discover that you have to lose 2 feet. In order to save your life, then the remedy is radical. But if you take it early and you reduce your amount of carbohydrates, you start taking your exercise and so on, and you eat your balanced diet and your thing, you can live a normal, healthy life. And it's the same position that the NIS finds itself. So I think the situation is nigh. I know that there are people who will play politics with it. That is to be expected. But I think the situation is nigh. It is something that must happen and should happen now. We have to increase the retirement age. There's no doubt about that. I don't think that my public sector colleagues need to be worried about infringing their constitutional rights, because this is NIS, this is not your state pension. And so you could still go home at 60 and get whatever state pension is due to you. But in terms of the NIS pension, that will be subject to the changes that must be made in order for the social security system to survive. And then I want to touch on the question of the NHI. The NHI again. It's interesting, It's interesting that all of the social improvements in matters related to social rights and benefits of the people have been done under the New National Party. So take, for example, the Trade Union Act. The first base act was passed by the PRG, Trade Union Recognition Act. But the Labor Code of 1999, that came in by the NNP, right? It's by the NNP that's doing it. So the NHI now is another necessary social construct requirement to address the question of healthcare in the country. And again, it is under the New National Party. Well, things have gone a little bit quiet because the work that is happening now is not the sexy work. The University of the West Indies, as you know, is working along with us. They're doing a lot of the research. The basket of medical services is being refined. The laws now are being drafted because you need to do that. Then, of course, the funding and how it will be funding is a key thing. And my understanding is that the Cabinet has given serious attention to that. I know, as a matter of fact, that the New National Party held a special retreat looking at this matter. All right? So it is of such importance that the party is putting its energies into it. I know that the Secretariat has been set up and has been funded. I know the Secretariat is going to be engaging all the different social partners. Because it will be administered by the NIS, the TUC has a hand in it, because the TUC sits on the board of directors, and the Secretariat now, which is part of the, comes under the administrative control of the NIS, so that the TUC has a first-hand insight into there. So, they're right there where they can get all the information that's necessary. So, as we advance with this work, with this vital work, I know that a number of hospitals, both externally are being identified, because there will be a degree of managed care for you to have your major surgical interventions and so on. I know these things are happening. We had a Grenadian expert in this field, a neurosurgeon, one Dr. Ned. He is an expert. Let me tell you this. This guy, as a Grenadian, he's fantastic in the field of medicine. All right, a Grenadian by birth. He has offered, and he's very passionate about it. He wants to see this. He wants to see NHI come off the ground. Right, and I know that the government and so on has been engaging him. He's been giving his advice, Professor Theodore and so on from the University of the West Indies, because they have helped set up NHIs in the BVI and some other countries. They're working in the Bahamas and so on and so on. Grenada is fairly advanced, as I say, and one anticipates that we should be in a position to implement. The deadlines keep pushing back, because when we began this journey, we didn't understand how complicated it was. Mm-hmm. Right, and it will require fundamental change in the structure of delivering healthcare, because we have socialized medicine. So that kind of national socialized medicine will require a fundamental shift in the structure. And therefore, a lot of engagement. They have union partners to be consulting with, a lot of discussions. You have the private sector involved. You have insurance companies which must be engaged. So a lot of that engagement is unfolding and so on. So that's the non-sexy part, which you don't hear much of, but that work is taking place full-time. And I am happy to be associated with it. And I believe that the new National Party could be in a position where the government moves now to implement now in the implementation stage, and that will be yet another major achievement in terms of improving the social welfare of the people, and that the party and the Prime Minister and so on should be aptly proud. Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Okay, the Venezuela issue now.
All right, well, I think the Venezuela issue cannot be separated from the foreign policy stance of the government. The government, in my view, has pursued a very progressive foreign policy stance. It recognizes one China, and we've seen the benefits of that recognition. We have 600 plus 300 and something low-cost homes are being built. Right, we had 350 something before. Now there's an additional 600 and something. There's a whole range of scholarships and different things that that the People's Republic of China have been providing us and so on. And so you take that foreign policy stance, which is correct. On the Venezuelan question, the policy stance is consistent with that of the CARICOM. Although CARICOM is not solidly united, there are some one-upman's ship in it, and I don't want to single out anybody, but I think the public knows where that is. But CARICOM, in fact, you know what's interesting? You know what's interesting right now? In America, we are being told that President Donald Trump is very worried about where his advisors are taking the U.S. in respect of Venezuela. And not only in respect of Venezuela, but in respect of Iran. Yeah, Iran too. And he's now saying that he's looking for back-channel ways of resolving the problem. But that is the heart of what CARICOM is proposing. What CARICOM and Dr. Mitchell and so have been proposing is this: we can't solve this through an invasion process, right? We have to talk to the parties, right? So that CARICOM is in opposition to the Lima Group. The Lima Group believes in big stick interventionism, right? But big stick interventionism, since the invasion of Afghanistan, has led America to one of its longest wars with no positive results. Look at how things have panned out in the Middle East. Look at how things have panned out in Libya. Excuse me. So that we have this contradictory position where a president that many people are uncomfortable with seems now to be holding suspect those hawks who are drumming up the beat of war. Right? Venezuela has been a historic neighbor of ours. We've had very good relations. And for the first time in Venezuela's history, with the coming of Chavez, Venezuela begun to share its resources with the people of the Caribbean. And Venezuela is not where it is now only by its own design. Venezuela has been brought there by those who have an interest in repossessing Venezuela's natural resources. Don't forget that the Venezuelan economy is being stifled. And long before we got here, there was an attempted coup against Chavez. Never forget that.
Yeah. Almost got through.
A man who won every election free and fair. So do not believe that the crisis we've seen in Venezuela, in terms of the difficulties in the economy, is as a result of the Venezuela's experiment in social justice. Venezuela economy was made and pushed to be there, and now they're unleashing problems against Cuba. So they're trying to cut Cuba out from the international banking system by putting restrictions and threatening. So right now there's a split between Europe and America on several key international issues. On the Iran question, the Europeans are not on board. On the BBC this morning, the foreign minister of Canada is visiting Cuba at this time. And she announced that the Canadians are opposed to the recent enactment of sections of the Helms-Burton Act done by the United States in order to punish Cuba further, to prevent it from getting medicines, to prevent it from getting basic things that it needs for its economy to function. Because these restrictions, okay.
One moment, Senator, because you're saying Cuba. You mean Cuba or Venezuela?
Cuba right now, the United
for the support
States.
that it's giving
And let me just say this. The United States has some extraterritorial laws. So if a pharmaceutical company based in in Europe or in any other country supplies Cuba with medical needs, they are in breach of American sanctions and they could be punished. They could be punished. Right? Now, could you imagine? Look at how much Cuba has given us as a people, as a region, in the face of these sanctions. Could you imagine if Cuba didn't have these sanctions, what it would have meant in terms of its own people and its development? Right? So we're living in a very challenging time, and not everyone has the stomach to stand on the side of right and to stand on the side and be patriotic. Happy am I to be associated with a government that has the belly. I noticed that my prime minister was not sitting in a corridor waiting to be called for some bread and cheese in somebody's private place. And I could not have had a prouder moment. I could not have had a prouder moment. Yes? I mean, one expect that from Ralph. Yes, but I could not have had a prouder moment when my Prime Minister went up to Shenda, where his mother lives.
Yeah.
He went to Shenda to have lunch provided by his mom and wasn't waiting on tea and biscuits by somebody in Florida. This is my proudest moment.
Senator, I think this is a good time to wrap. Final statements.
And on that bit of facetiousness, I end. And I want to thank
morning,
you.
Mom. Well, actually, afternoon. I know she's listening.
Right.
Senator, we'd like to thank you so very much for being in studio with us. And from some of the comments I'm seeing coming in, it seems as though they're calling on you to be here on a weekly basis. So
I would have liked to heard some of them, hear some of them. You know.
We're going to make sure we give the opportunity.
You must close
time.
down now because I would have taken 2 questions. If there were any.
We would have to wrap about now because one of the stations has to go off.
Okay.
But what we definitely will do is we'll make sure that you can come in at your earliest convenience again. To expand on the NIS one and the National Health Insurance, to expand as well on workers' rights. I think it's important. A lot of workers do not understand their rights. And I think, but I know, I can't think that I know that the best person to speak on that would be you. To inform workers of what their rights are. We have many people that are working in different business spaces, both public and private sector, that are not aware of what their rights and responsibilities are, or the rights and responsibilities of the employer as well. And not just the workers, the employers need to know what their rights and responsibilities are as well. So we're inviting you, even if it's on a weekly basis. I know your schedule is a tight one, even though you're retired. I know your schedule is a tight one, but we'll work out something where you can be here on a more regular basis.
Yeah, well, as you know, my parliamentary duties, because I serve at the parliamentary level interregionally too.
Yeah.
I sit on Parl-Americas. In fact, I will be going to the 11th gathering, I think it is the 11th or 7th gathering in Mexico shortly, because I sit on the executive board of Parl-Americas in respect of its section that deals with gender matters, and there's a meeting in Mexico. And then, of course, the CARICOM Economic Commission, which I'm now serving. We're going to be meeting with Prime Minister Mia Mottley shortly. So, it takes up my time.
Okay. Well, Senator, we'd like to thank you so very much for being in with us this morning and this afternoon. And we'd like to thank the radio stations for staying on with us. I know one of them had to run off, so they got on us. But we'd like to thank them for being on with us. And folks, we know you wanted to get a call in, and so when you see sometimes when the discussion going like that, it's difficult to cut it to bring in a call. So we'll make sure that the next time we have Senator Humphrey, and we'll open the phone lines from early up, so that if they have questions in relation to the issue after the initial statements, that you'll be able to call in and say exactly what it is that you, what questions you have and so on. So Devon, that's it?
That's it.
Yeah, it's been an interesting week. We should be back next week with more hard talk for you. And folks, we will be having more guests in studio with us on a daily basis. You will be hearing different individuals coming in with us on Hard Talk. I would like to thank you. Thank all of the radio stations. Thank all of the listeners, the callers who have called into the program this week, and all of our technical guy, Mr. Nazim Benjamin, hiding in the back there right now, juking the computer. So, so all of you who have lent your support to Hard Talk for this week. And indeed, we look forward to engaging with you next week. So in whatever you say and do it safe and secure. We want to be speaking to and with you.
Not about you.
We are out of here for another week.
Peace.
Stay up to date with all that's happening with the new national party, NNP. Send us a message via text or WhatsApp on 405-8683 with your name, email, and constituency. Stay in the know with NNP. Get updated.
Significant improvements in the quality of broadband access for Grenada and its dependencies. We'll have details to this story and more in the National Report. With the details to the news for Wednesday, May 15th, I am Rakisha St. Louis. Grenada and its dependencies will soon boast of significant improvements in the quality of broadband access, which will be facilitated under the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, CACIP. The World Bank-funded project is being executed by Digicel on behalf of the governments of Grenada, St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This phase of the project will include the installation of marine fiber optic cable is being done by the Canadian-based company International Telecoms. The project will increase access to regional broadband network by bringing true broadband connectivity to schools, community centers, and government offices. It will also advance development of an ICT-enabled services industry in the 3 beneficiary countries. During a press conference on Wednesday morning ahead of the start of installation of the subsea cables, Minister for Infrastructure Development and Public Utilities, Honorable Gregory Bowen, said this is a major milestone for Grenada that paves the way for the inclusion of advanced technology in the future development of the country. He said each sector stands to benefit from this project.
Our children being able to work online, our examinations being done online, no buffering, lecturing. I've always advocated that the best mathematics teachers should teach mathematics to the entire people in Grenada and perhaps the region. We can do this now with broadband. So we sit in one school and the teacher lectures to everyone because of the technology. The opportunities are great. Jobs from one location, working for persons in other locations, other countries, this can manifest itself from what we have now, our broadband system. Carriacou, we are especially pleased with Carriacou because with all the development, they have never had the opportunity for real broadband, always a radio link.
Project Offshore Installation Manager for International Telecoms, Todd Nichols, said the installation process will commence on Thursday. He said the cables will be laid on the seabed from Conference Bay, St. Andrew, to the east of Kikamjini, going on to Hillsborough, Carriacou.
We anticipate getting underway tomorrow. From here over to Conference late tomorrow and spending all day Friday on site doing some trials and prepping the beach. From there, we hope to get underway Saturday morning, which would put us into Carriacou on Sunday. We will see how time goes, but the Carriacou segment, that's 53 kilometers in length. That is the longest segment of this particular project, and but we anticipate being able to have that completed by Sunday. So yeah, we're very excited about participating with everybody here.
Siobhan Redhead, CEO of Digicel Grenada Limited, said she's pleased that Digicel and the government can collaborate to enhance the technology of the future.
Being introduced via fiber subsea, which you guys are here responsible for laying, which will be connected to our terrestrial fiber underground, will not only provide tremendous capacity, unprecedented capacity for our network, and off-island capacity and network resiliency. Now, this technology will provide the bandwidth for tomorrow's technology. It will not only change the way we evolve in terms of how we communicate, it will change the way we're able to deliver education in schools, and it will also change the way we run our businesses, and that's something we have to acknowledge across Grenada, Carriacou, Petit Martinique, the Grenadines, and by default St. Lucia and St. Vincent through this CACIP project.
Following the press conference, government and Digicel officials were given a tour of the telecoms cable ship to get an understanding of the installation process. International Telecoms officials say installation of cables process will be eco-friendly, minimizing harm to the ecosystem. The entire process of installation and testing will take approximately 5 weeks. The Blue Innovation Institute, through the Ministry of Climate Resilience and the New York University, will host the first in a series of Climate Smart City Expo on the Carnage in front of the Financial Complex, St. George's, on Friday. The activity, which runs from 12 to 9 p.m., will include a visual expo of the challenges of climate change and the potential solutions. Dr. Angus Friday, co-chair of the Blue Innovation Institute, says it has become necessary to host the expo to encourage dialogue and increase sensitization about the issues of climate change.
We're working with the Green Climate Fund and New York University on this, and once we get past this initial hurdle, Grenadians themselves will have the technical capabilities to be able to replicate this in other towns and urban areas around Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique.
Dr. Friday says the New York University has been a technical supporter throughout the project, and representatives will be on hand to share information on their findings.
They have come up with a narrative around some of the challenges related to sea level rise and solutions for things like urban densification. A lot of the traffic that we're seeing building up now is also part and parcel of the problem. But if we can come up with solutions for this, it would put Grenada very much ahead. Solutions related to new forms of public transport, e-mobility, and so forth. By e-mobility, I'm talking about electric mobility. So these are some of the things that people will be learning about.
One of the interesting initiatives undertaken in the project by the New York University was to put tide gauges in the harbor at Grenville and St. George's.
We took that data and sent it off to NASA, that's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the United States. They did some very interesting modeling, basically showing us that the Carriacou is in danger of being underwater in a few years' time, just as a result of storm surge. I think sometimes you already see the waves coming over the Carriacou. So this is a huge concern. And by 2050, it'll be completely underwater. So we need to begin to take steps now to put in place the solutions that would not only deal with a problem, but would actually help to attract more investment, more life, more activity.
The Climate Smart Cities Expo will begin at 12 noon with various presentations at different intervals during the afternoon prior to the cultural package and the lighting of the buildings on the Carriacou. This is the National Report. We'll have more news after the break.
Data reveals that rats and other rodents are responsible for the transmission of many diseases. In Grenada, the most common is leptospirosis, and it can cause your death. This disease is directly related to rats and mice infestation. Signs and symptoms of lepto, as it is commonly referred to, are high fever, headache, chills, muscle aches, vomiting, jaundice, and abdominal pain. If your home had or is infected with rats and you have any of these symptoms, please check with your doctor immediately. Declare war on rats. Starve them. Kill them. Rats are the most unwelcomed guests. Reduce, control, eliminate them. This is a message from the Ridge to Reef Project, protecting biodiversity and ecosystem functions.
Welcome back. CARICOM foreign ministers who met in Grenada this week are calling on the European Union to adopt a more collaborative approach with regard to the subject of blacklisting. The ministers who met at the Radisson Resort say the EU's approach to tax governance is inappropriate. They say the relevant agency to deal with these matters is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, which is inclusive in allowing other member states to be present and to be consulted. The foreign ministers also touched on a wide range of topics ranging from climate change to border issues. On the subject of Venezuela, the ministers reaffirmed the guiding principles of non-interference and non-intervention in its affairs. Foreign Minister Honorable Peter David addressed the subject at the conclusion of the two-day meeting on Tuesday.
St. Kitts leading, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados involved, and COFTOR merely reiterated the position that we call for dialogue in Venezuela, and we are urging the parties together. Fortunately for us, over the last 5 months, we found that many of the countries who previously advocated war and intervention are now agreeing to the CARICOM's position, and they are more accepting CARICOM's position, recently manifested in the visit by the St. Kitts Prime Minister Timothy Harris to to Latin America, where he had engagements not only with Latin American countries who are calling for dialogue, but also with some of the European countries who have now accepted that position.
That story just ended the national report for today, Wednesday, May 15th. Let's recap the top story. Significant improvements in the quality of broadband access for Grenada and its dependencies. On behalf of everyone here at the Government Information Service who made this newscast possible, I am Rakisha St. Louis saying thank you for joining us. Until next time.